Hi, welcome to Tales of Dread. In this episode we have some true creepypasta for you. The allegedly true horror stories were cryptid encounters. Not encounters with the Bigfoot, werewolf, dogman, wendigo or skinwalker. No, these people came across reptilians. Now, it's story time? I live in the Carolinas, where there are a lot of swamps. They can't be avoided. But if you grew up in this area, you know the rules: don't go near them without bug spray, and be careful of snakes and alligators. But what if I told you that I once saw something down there that made me think I should instead take 100 mosey bites? Let me tell you about it. So, I was driving home from work one night when I noticed the car started to pull. I realized I had a flat tire, so I pulled over and made sure one of the front wheels was flapping. I work in a bar, and sometimes the customers get a little rowdy. I think there was a fight outside, and some broken glass wasn't picked up, so I had to drive over it. Now I know that you should always have a spare. It was one of the million or so things on my list that I hadn't done yet. So now I'm stuck on the side of the road near the swamps, because I couldn't have broken down in town with all the street lights and people. So I'm trying to decide whether to call for help from AAA or a friend. And that's right, when I hear this strange sound, I'm near a swamp at night, where all kinds of animals live and go about their business, making all kinds of sounds. But this sounded different. At first, I thought someone was just passing by, or that someone had seen my car and stopped further down the road, which I had missed, and was now coming to help because it sounded like wet footsteps, like someone had been walking through water. I looked both ways down the street, but to my surprise, I couldn't see who or what was making the noise. This was because I was obviously looking at the road. When I turned around and looked back at the swamp, I saw who or what was making the noise. It looked like a lizard, but not like a normal lizard, which would have been too normal. Don't worry, though, because this lizard looked like a person. I just stood there with my mouth open, pinching myself and rubbing my eyes to see if I was really dreaming. I couldn't help but stay awake and stare at what I can only describe as a lizard man until I got home and tried to find out more about him. The best way I can describe him is that he kind of looked like an alligator. He had two legs that looked like human legs, but his body was much thinner and his legs were much longer. It's kind of hard for me to say exactly what it is. I guess because my mind really wants to try to figure out what my eyes are telling it. Yes, he looked really tall, like a normal person. His skin was thick and scaly, and his arms and legs looked very strong. His head looked like that of a real lizard or alligator. It had long jaws with big teeth, a snout, and eyes that stuck out on the sides. He was just slowly waiting for the water in the swamp to come right at me. I'm going to take a chance and say that lizard people don't learn how to fix things in a shop. So, the only thing I can think is that this was going to hurt me. So I grabbed my phone and keys and ran as far away from the swamp and my car as I could until I reached some houses and street lights about a mile down the road. Then I called a friend and asked them to come get me. He is either a lot braver or a lot dumber now. Then he takes a big pickup truck and drives back. When I told him what I had seen, he wanted to check it out right away. The fact that he had a shotgun in his back made me feel stronger. But there was still the chance. We went back to my car, which was still right where I had left it. So it looks like this lizard guy wasn't interested in stealing my car. My friend Nate jumps out of the truck with a shotgun in his hand and starts shouting, but we don't see anything. I don't know what that thing was or what it was supposed to do. I didn't know much except that I didn't want to wait around and find out. But, as I said before, I was feeling more confident. I looked, and I not only found your channel, but I also found a lot of other disturbing videos that were like yours. So it looks like lizard men or alligator men are everywhere, and based on what you've seen before, it looks like there's a whole family of them living in the swamps here in southeastern America. You should really pay attention to some of what your mom tells you. We always thought we knew best when we were kids, but listen. People usually have a good reason for telling you not to do something, but we usually find out the hard way. For example, my mother told us kids not to play in the stream at the bottom of the field because it was dirty and muddy and you never knew what you might find or catch in there. It was like telling us kids not to eat candy because it would make our teeth fall out. After we were warned, we were even more drawn to the stream. So, after a rainy night, my little brother and I went straight to the stream the next morning, knowing it would be full. So, it sounds even better. We looked for newts with sticks, made paper boats, and did all the other things that any child would do near a stream. We took off our shoes and stomped in the muddy water. That's when we saw ripples in the air, which told us there was something living there besides just water and flies, which was all we had seen so far. We were happy about this. Now I don't know what to expect in the muddy, mucky stream, but whatever came out of the water would blow our tiny, 8-10-year-old minds. He, or they must have been lying low on the ground under the stream when it stood up and rose from the water. There was no way he could have been covered by that much water. If he had been, he would have been about our height, or about 4 feet, and covered in green scales, weird fins, and gills. He looked like something out of a comic book. He was short and had long, bent legs, thin arms, and hands and feet with webbing. I'm not trying to be mean. It looked like an amphibian, and it was both funny and scary. This little creature came out of the stream, but he wasn't so little to us at the time because he was about our size. My brother and I were scared and excited at the same time. We had our mouths wide open. It's not exactly what you'd think you'd see. I wish I could say we weren't scared, but we both were. We weren't ready for something like that to happen. He mostly just looked at us with a bored expression, then turned around and ran away. We ran all the way home and didn't stop until we were back in the kitchen with my mom, who just looked at us as if to say, "See, I told you not to go into the stream." It's like she knew deep down that we shouldn't have been there and that there might have been more danger than we thought. Of course, this happened a long time ago. But as an adult, it's fun to think back on those days and realize that there are animals that aren't like what we imagined. I don't believe in Bigfoot, but what my brother and I saw could have been caused by an animal species that hasn't been found yet. I don't know what kind of animal that was. People have asked me if you ever get used to living where alligators live, but I'm not sure what to say. It's like asking if you ever get used to living near a hornet's nest. Sure, you'll get used to the sights and sounds. But if you get stung, you get stung, and it doesn't matter how often you see him, it still hurts. So it is with gators, they eat you and you die, no matter how often you sing their songs. I've lived in gator country for 45 years, and I still have all my limbs. I do think that some close calls have made me less brave, and one in particular stands out. I'm not sure if I can really put it on the alligators. I had just enough southern comfort to make me braver than I should have been, and when I'm brave, I like to go exploring. I want to take the canoe and, if I need it, the lantern and go exploring. Even when it's trying to look like a drifting log, I know what an alligator looks like, and no amount of alcohol can make me miss it. It's a sight I know very well, but I found something that was really new. It's a miracle that it didn't kill me, since I went in fully expecting to die. So I'm out there exploring because I'm curious and I want to feel good. I could row down those parts. We're getting smaller and smaller, and the reasons for this are becoming more and more similar. I went to a water cleanup. I'm sure I saw what looked like tall, green pineapples growing out of the water. They had the same shape and texture, but the outside looked like scales and a lot of things would move and wiggle every once in a while. There was also the occasional burp, which could have been air or fluid coming out. If I'd been smart or sober, I would have run back home as fast as I could. But I wasn't as sober as a big kid who just found out about big pine cones. I had to find out what those big, scaly green things were hiding. They were almost impossible to cut with my knife. I could easily get the blade under a scale and pull it off. That was it, though. The things had good protection. I could figure out that it was some kind of egg or embryo, but I didn't think long enough about what made them, and the weather told me that there would be things nearby to protect the brood. At first, I thought it was a gator getting ready to attack me. Then I thought the whiskey might have been mixed with something stronger than just alcohol because I saw what could have been a gator walking on its two back legs, keeping its balance just fine and holding its body up with the grace of a cobra. The head, on the other hand, was shorter and the eyes were bigger than usual. The mouth was also a little bit open, and all the teeth you'd expect to see were there. However, the eyes were alert and smart in a way I've never seen in a gator before. It must have been Mama, and she wasn't happy to see me. I pulled out my dad's empty revolver and aimed it at my attacker. She or it seemed to understand right away and stopped moving. I ran away from the water where I had just dropped my phone. After that, the last thing I remember is someone calling my name from far away. I lost my mind. When I didn't come home at night, my wife had gone back to look for me. They were pretty close to me when I was wrestling with my little scaly friend. I don't see any other reason why I should still be here. If it had just been me and her, I'm sure that thing that lived in the swamp would have eaten me to death. I have never seen an alligator like that before. I also don't know what it was. I don't know why I even said the word alligator. Even though it looked like an alligator, many of its features were very human. So, I don't know if he was or wasn't an alligator man. And its eggs or embryos, which I found. Either way, I'm very upset, and I hope this news will make you feel better than it makes me feel. I went to the Amazon rainforest as part of a research trip. We were looking for signs that some plants might be able to treat modern illnesses. The fact that the world's healthcare system needs all the help it can get is another big secret. The locals led us to a thick grove of trees that grew these strange, small yellow fruits that were not lemons. When this fruit was taken back to a lab for research, it was found that substances and proteins in it killed cancer cells in their early stages right away. Just so you know, my bosses were eager to get their hands on not only these fruits but also the seeds of this tree so they could start thinking about how to grow them in a controlled environment as soon as possible. The natives told them that they shouldn't let too much of their fruit leave the grove at once. If not, the forest would get mad. We thought you were joking. Well, I hoped that the forest wouldn't think that 3 small crates was too much. I was putting the last nail in the crate's lid when we all heard a blood-chilling howl. Staring at us from between the trees were large compound eyes that mostly changed from green to yellow. Most of the faces were olive green, but some were a mix of gray and brown. At first, I thought they were people who had a lot of war paint on them. Does that make sense? We might have stepped on the land of an undiscovered tribe in the Amazon, but then I saw that they weren't even people. I saw scales that looked like meat hooks and teeth that looked like shark teeth. Faces that ranged from those that looked like Komodo dragons to those that looked like modern crocodiles. I'm not sure I've ever run so fast before. My veins were burning, and it felt like my heart would stop at any moment. After a long time, I turned around and saw that the creatures were no longer following me. I had tried to get back to that grove, but I could never find my way back. People thought that the expedition was a big failure. And before we could leave the country, the Brazilian military met us and took our 3 crates. They also took the leader of the expedition and almost locked him up before giving him a good talk. We were told to leave the country as soon as possible and never come back. I'm not sure why the Brazilian military had to get involved or why they thought they had to take the fruit away, threaten us, and tell us to leave. There's something going on. I think they knew there was something wrong with that grove, and the warnings we got before about that same grove were probably meant to keep us from going there. What do you know? We shouldn't have seen what we did see. I went on a long fishing trip to a more remote part of Alaska. Of course, every part of Alaska is remote. There are a lot of places in Alaska that you can only get to by plane. Even for Alaskans, I was miles away from anyone else. I was alone with the water, the tall grass, the pines, and the blue sky. At least, I thought that was the case. I spent the whole night looking up at the moon. Something about it is hypnotic and keeps you interested. Then I'd turn on the water. Then I would see changes in the water at the time. I just thought this was because of the fish, which made me look forward to the day's catches. But there were some things about the disturbance in the water that they couldn't explain. For example, there were things sticking out of the water that I knew didn't belong to any fish, and trust me, if anyone knew fish, it was me. I woke up in the middle of the night because I had a gut feeling I was in trouble. I couldn't tell you why, though. I got out of my tent on purpose and looked around. I didn't see any wolves, coyotes, or bears, but when I looked toward the water, I saw a hunched-over shape with a long tail. I can see the shape of long claws and a dorsal plate with spikes that ran from the top of the back to the end of the tail. At first, I thought this was a real dinosaur hunting at night, which would make sense since dinosaurs were nocturnal. The way the water moved was very strange. Then I realized I was seeing more than one of the same kind of animal. Perhaps dozens. Every time I could almost see their heads, they were pacing at the edge of the water. They were looking at me. I felt sick to my stomach when I saw that I was surrounded by miles and miles of empty, wild land. I could run for hours without seeing anybody. I was out there by myself with these things that knew I was there, so it's safe to say I didn't get much sleep for the rest of that trip. Some of those nights, I didn't sleep at all, and when I did, it was because I was so tired. I don't know why those dinosaur things never tried to get my attention. Maybe they were just keeping an eye on something and making sure this person didn't go any farther. In any case, I still see those shapes following me around like sharks when I'm sleeping, but that's probably just my fear and trauma from what happened. Even today, I really think I saw dinosaurs in the flesh. I was driving home one afternoon through some thick farmland. I looked at the open fields and thought to myself how lucky I was to have a steady job in town and then go home to my house in the country. It was a beautiful spring day with almost full sun and trees that were starting to look green and healthy again. I was just looking around and taking in the sights when I saw something run out in front of me onto the road. I've never gone too fast because of this. On the winding roads, because you never know what could jump out of the bushes. I have almost hit a deer before, and I still don't know which of us was more startled. This thing was far enough in front of me that I could carefully hit the brakes and slow down without causing any problems because there were no other cars around. Also, this gave me a chance to see what kind of creature this jaywalker was. I know it was some kind of lizard-like reptile. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed it was there. Because of the greenish scales on its body, you could tell where something like that came from or was going. I didn't know there was water around here. There aren't any huge lakes or swamps, but there is water. Still, it was a kind of reptile I had never seen before crossing the road. You can see that most of its relatives. It wasn't moving like a gecko, slithering across the road or running on 4 legs. No, this thing was walking across the road like a person on 2 feet. It looked like it had small, webbed feet, a long, scaled body, and even small arms. It almost looked like a lizard or an alligator had just decided that 2 feet was the way to go. Its body didn't look right. Not that what I was seeing was even the slightest bit normal. It looked more like a human torso, except that it was covered in green scales and had the legs of a reptile. The head came next. Have you ever seen the thing from the Black Lagoon? That strange-looking head with what looked like flat gills on the side. Well, that's what it looked like on top of this long, messed-up human lizard. It also wasn't that tall. At most, maybe 3 feet. When it saw the car, it turned and looked at me for a moment with wide, unblinking eyes. Then it took off faster than I could have ever imagined. I just sat there with my car running and wondered what the heck I had just seen. It didn't look scary, and I wasn't really scared, but I was surprised. After a few moments, when it looked like I wouldn't have to go back, I just kept going home. But I'll never forget exactly what I saw that night. I was on my way home from a work conference a few years ago, when I started to feel very tired. I know myself well enough to know that I needed a break and to try to get some sleep before I fell asleep at the wheel. So I stopped on the side of the road and closed my eyes. I must have needed it, because the next thing I knew, I woke up with a start and looked at my phone. I had been outside for almost 3 hours, and now the sun was just starting to come up. Now that it was getting lighter, I could see that I had parked near a lake or reservoir. Maybe I got out of the car for just a minute or two to stretch because I couldn't feel my legs and my neck hurt from not getting enough sleep. As I got out of the car, I saw that there were footprints in it. It wasn't hard to see that the paint is white and the prints are dirty, but there was something odd about them. They were far enough apart to look like whatever had walked straight over. My car was standing on 2 legs, but what was even stranger was that it had webbed feet for a moment. I thought it might be a goose because they have 2 legs and webbed feet, but when I looked closer, even though I'm not an expert on the size of bird feet, I realized that it wasn't a goose. These prints look much bigger, like a man-sized creature with webbed feet crossed over my car. The tracks also led to the water, so whatever had been on top of the car had pretty much gone straight into the water. I could also see that where the footprints started, there was a big puddle on the side of the road. I looked out into the water for a long time, trying to figure out what was going on. But no matter what I tried, I couldn't figure out why there was a lizard footprint the size of a man on my car that went straight into the water. So I spent some time listening to YouTube channels and found yours. And you seem to know a lot about this specific topic. Could you please give me some good advice? Dogs can be both good and bad. They're great when they come over and wag their tails lovingly, and they're fun to have around when you need a reason to get up and go for a walk. When they have to go out at 10 p.m., they are not so great. When it's cold, dark, and raining, especially if they have to go to the bathroom and have been taught not to do their business in the yard. So, that's why, on a cold, wet, dark night, I was in the woods behind my house yelling at my dog, who took so long to find a good place to sleep that I thought he had the runs. I stood there stomping my feet and blowing on my hands, trying to stay warm and not notice that it was raining on the back of my jacket. When I heard rustling in the trees, it wasn't on the side where the dog was. Since we were in the wrong place, I wasn't too worried. The animals that come out at night were ready to play, and the last thing they needed was to see a person and a big dog that couldn't decide where to squat. There was a sound like a wet hiss. I know that sounds like an odd way to describe it, but it was kind of like when you go swimming and swallow too much water. There was more rustling and shaking of leaves, and I yelled at the dog to hurry up or I would leave him there alone all night. Not that he understood or cared, but that's what we do. More rustling, and for the first time I noticed that the rustling wasn't coming from the ground but was coming from the same height as me in the trees. I thought it was strange. It could have been a squirrel, but since it was much higher up and then walked out, my first thought was that it was a kid dressed up. It was too late to be alone in the woods, and Halloween wasn't for a long time. As I stood there staring at it, I started to think that if it was costume makeup, it was Hollywood-level special effects from its feet to its head. It had what looked like brown, scaly skin to me because the light was bad. It was just a little bit taller than me and skinny as a rake, with long, dangling arms and long legs like a supermodel. I didn't know if it was male or female because its torso was flat and I couldn't see any parts that would tell me. What about the head? It was long and flat, not round or oval like a person, but squat like a real snake, with big eyes that didn't close. The dog also noticed. It made a noise and then whimpered as it ran over to me. That scared the snake enough that it kind of slithered away. I have no idea how it could have moved. It had long legs, but the way it moved made me think of that. The dog started barking like crazy and ran after this thing. I was able to grab him and drag him back to the house. When we went inside, he was right behind me. For a while, he drank, begged, and acted crazy. I can't take him into those woods at night anymore. I couldn't have thought that the dog also saw it. So, you must have seen something out there that we can't explain. I'm pretty sure I know what's under that. I'm not hallucinating. What do you think about my encounter?